Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our participants in the United States and all around the world. Before we begin our webinar today, and on behalf of everyone involved, we all wish you and your family good health and well-being during these uncertain times. We also express our sincere appreciation for all, including some of your family members that are putting themselves on the front lines. Thank you. My name is Harsh Desai. I am the chair of the American Nuclear Society's Young Members Group. On behalf of the ANS Young Members Group, Clean Energy Ministerial's NICE Future Initiative, and the International Youth Nuclear Congress, or IYNC, I welcome you all to this exciting webinar on microreactors in the near horizon. We have over 1,600 people registered for this webinar. And as I speak, we have over 900 people participating. So no pressure to all of my colleagues that are presenting today. So before we get started, let me highlight a couple of things. First, the logistics. All of our participants will give remarks 8 minutes or so each, lasting a total of 45 minutes, or the first half. Tim Crook, who's our YMG Executive Committee member and also the chair of the program committee, will moderate the questions and answer session for the next 45 minutes or so afterwards. For those that have questions, please submit your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of the webinar. There's a section titled Q&A. You should be able to submit your questions. We will be compiling those questions, and given the high attendance here, we will try to get through as many as possible. Again, we apologize if we don't go through all the questions, but we will try our best. Everyone that is logged in as a participant is on mute by default. So if you have a question, like I said, please do submit it through the Q&A section below. Next, I want to take a couple of minutes to thank our co-sponsors. First, I want to thank the ANS Young Members Group. This is a constituency of 300 early to mid-career nuclear professionals. At a macro level, YMG enables young professionals to learn inter and interpersonal skills, network with peers among the 10,000 member society, participate in technical and non-technical leadership opportunities, familiarize with governance structure of the society, and recognize their peers through awards. YMG sponsors non-technical workshops and meetings that provide professional development and networking opportunities for all young professionals and students. YMG encourages its members to participate in activities of these groups that are closely related to their professional interests and their personal interests, as well as their local American Nuclear Society sections. Young Members Group is also launching a webinar series to provide a spotlight on the national labs, with Idaho National Laboratory being highlighted first. The INL focused webinar will take place on April 15th, 2020. Please keep an eye out for more information on that. Second, I want to highlight the Clean Energy Ministerial. This is a leading group forum at the ministerial level for clean energy deployment, advocating clean energy actions, innovations, and solutions. The NICE Future initiative, which was formally launched by the CEM, Clean Energy Ministerial, formally launched just less than 2 years ago by ministers from the United States, Canada, and Japan, and compromises 11 countries, 15 partner organizations, and has engaged experts from nearly 60 countries. The initiative puts, for the first time, the ministerial spotlight at CEM on nuclear in clean energy systems. Now that has changed, and rightfully so. The NICE Future Initiative envisions a world in which innovative nuclear applications and uses advanced energy, clean energy goals. While the June 2020 ministerial in Chile is being delayed due to coronavirus concerns, the new dates are being worked out and will be announced soon. The ministers are searching for an alternative timing and to continue keeping the global focus on clean energy in prominent view. Finally, the third organization I want to highlight is the International Youth Nuclear Congress, or IYNC. This is a global network of the future generation of professionals in the nuclear field, working to develop new approaches to communicate benefits of nuclear power as part of a balanced energy mix, promote further peaceful uses of nuclear science and technology for the welfare of mankind, and transfer knowledge from the current generation of leading scientists to the next generation across international boundaries. Thanks to all of these organizations for your efforts. This brings us to why we tuned into webinar today. Today, we will hear about the transformative potential of microreactors and why we see them as game changers for clean energy. Our panel today will cover a range of topics, including their potential applications and what we are doing to bring these microreactors to marketplace. We will start with a keynote speaker from U.S. Department of Energy. This will be Alice Capiniti. She serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Reactor Fleet and Advanced Reactor Deployment in Office of the Nuclear Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy. Her responsibilities include advanced reactor development activities, including specifically microreactors, innovative nuclear research in advanced modeling and simulation, advanced manufacturing, and advanced sensors and other cross-cutting areas, competitive R&D and infrastructure investment programs, light water reactor programs focused on technical and economic sustainability of the existing U.S. fleet of commercial reactors, and development and deployment of small modular reactors. And finally, her program oversees the much beloved Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear, or GAIN initiative, and the newly launched National Reactor Innovation Center, or the Enriched initiative. Thank you, Alice, for participating. And with that, let me turn over to you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Alice Capiniti from the U.S. Department of Energy. As Hirsch mentioned, we're delighted to present this webinar with the Nice Future Initiative, which successfully pulled nuclear into the Clean Energy Ministerial, and rightly so. Nuclear energy is non-emitting and provides about a third of emissions-free electricity and operates both cleanly and reliably 24/7. And as we see the energy demand grow around the world, nuclear energy will play a key role as our global energy mix transitions toward cleaner energy systems. And we see microreactors playing a key role in that future, which is why we're talking about them today. Next slide. While there is no strict definition of microreactors, these are small nuclear reactors that can generate approximately 1 to 20 megawatts of electricity and provide heat for industrial applications. Microreactors are 100 to 1,000 times smaller than conventional nuclear reactors. While 1 megawatt electric may not sound like a lot, that is enough to provide reliable, resilient, and clean nuclear generated electricity to 1,000 homes in small and remote communities. Most of these small reactors are designed to be transported nearly fully assembled to an operating location via truck, ship, airplane, or rail car. The Department of Energy believes that microreactors have the potential to provide the commercial and defense sectors with a clean, reliable, and resilient energy supply. The potential benefits offered by microreactors include enhanced inherent safety features, smaller footprints, semi-autonomous and remote control operations that can significantly reduce staffing needs, high temperature operations for both electricity and process heat production, and highly integrated and transportable systems reducing on-site construction times. These attributes are driving the expanding interest in this class of reactors by providing customer choice for non-traditional energy markets, including competitive electricity and process heat supplies for remote and off-grid communities and industrial locations, resilient and reliable energy supplies for remote and forward military bases, reliable and clean electricity supplies for disaster and emergency relief operations. We will hear about a couple of these use cases from our speakers today. Next slide, please. The images that you'll see shortly are produced by Third Way. They were generated to depict a number of use cases where small reactors can have a big impact. Starting clockwise from the top left, in remote communities such as Alaska, where fuel to run generators is costly to deliver, electricity prices can be up to 16 times higher than the national average and can consume up to half the income of poor households. While the artwork associated with this scenario is rather futuristic, this problem exists today. Arctic communities have already begun to explore the use of small reactors, with some that are under 2 megawatts in size, enough to meet the needs for towns with fewer than 1,000 residents. Next, upper right, data from internet servers require a lot of power, about 70 billion kilowatt hours per year, or nearly 2% of America's energy consumption. In this data server scenario, one or multiple advanced reactors could completely power a data center, whether it requires 2 megawatts or 200 megawatts, supplying reliable, consistent energy at competitive costs with zero emissions. Moving to the lower right, a clean transit hub. Transportation is now the largest source of greenhouse gases in the United States, surpassing emissions from electric power production. In this scenario, a small reactor provides power to charge the electric vehicles in a park and ride garage, as well as a fleet of buses stored at a nearby depot for recharging every night. And then finally, an industrial hub scenario in the lower left. In the United States, a fifth of our greenhouse gas emissions comes from industrial processes. In this scenario, a high temperature reactor provides 700-degree heat for a chemical processing facility and provides heat to factories within a reasonable distance. So what are we doing to make these scenarios a reality? Next slide, please. At the Department of Energy, we are conducting cross-cutting research and development that directly benefits the advancement and demonstration of microreactor technologies. As part of this program, we are developing experimental infrastructure to support microreactor component design, demonstration, and safety-related testing. We are also collecting experimental data to validate microreactor system performance and modeling and simulation tools. And because our ultimate goal is to see these technologies launched into the marketplace, we maintain close engagement with the nuclear developer community and with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. DOE recognizes that demonstrations are a vital step toward maturing technologies toward commercialization. That is why we constructed a non-nuclear test bed at Idaho National Laboratory to support non-nuclear demonstrations of a variety of integrated microreactor systems within a prototypical microgrid environment. This test bed will be used to generate validation data for design and licensing cases. Also, the department is standing up the National Reactor Innovation Center, or Enriched, led by the Idaho National Laboratory. Enriched will offer a range of capabilities to enable the testing and demonstration of reactor concepts by the private sector. You will hear Nick Smith today talk about the various sites being considered at INL to host actual nuclear fuel demonstrations of microreactor concepts. So again, I thank you for joining us, and I will now turn us over to our moderator, Tim Cook. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice. So I'm Tim Crook. I'm a consultant with MCR Performance Solutions. We do utility consulting. And then I'm also a Texas A&M Aggie, got 2 degrees from there. And I'm serving today as the American Nuclear Society Young Members Group Program's co-chair. Our committee is responsible for all of the YMG content at ANS national meetings, as well as digital content like this webinar and the series of webinars we are putting on. So just to remind you, each panelist will chat for about 8 minutes, and then we will have Q&A at the end. As we said before, enter your questions via the Zoom control bar. I also want to thank my YMG program's co-chair, Matt Morgan. He is helping assist with the Q&A, which is certainly needed as we have passed 1,000 people who are actually live on this webinar right now. So first I'll introduce Mark Nichol. He's the Senior Director of New Reactors at the Nuclear Energy Institute. In this role, Mark leads the industry's efforts to improve the regulatory, policy, and small business environment for new reactors. Mark has previously worked for Duke Energy and Toshiba in the areas of used nuclear fuel management, operations, and new plant projects. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you, Tim. We go to my second slide. Thank you.
I apologize for
the
slide lag.
No problem. I want to talk a little bit more about the market opportunities for microreactors. Alice did a great job explaining what a microreactor is and also generally where they could fit. And so largely they're in remote markets, but when we look at the microreactor market opportunities, we divide them into two sides. There's a stationary side, and these are microreactors that are intended to operate for their entire life in one single location. And there's the mobile variety, and the mobile means that they can be set up quickly, operated, taken offline and moved off-site quickly, and then set up and operated in another location. And you could do that multiple times over the life of the reactor. And so those while the underlying technology between those two varieties of microreactors is very similar, the same, there are going to be things that need to be designed into the mobile variety that the stationary will not necessarily need. And so if we look at the stationary market in these remote areas, we have villages, as Alice had said, they're currently using diesel generators, very expensive energy because of the fuel costs, but especially the transportation of fuel into remote areas is very, very expensive. We have microgrids, and this is something that could be in a more urban setting, and so it could power a small microgrid that provides resilient power for backup in terms of hospitals, things like that need to continue operating if the larger grid goes down. Mining operations many of them are in remote areas and need power and heat. And so the microreactors can provide both power and heat, and also defense installations. And I know we have Troy Werschel from DoD that's going to talk more about that later. On the mobile side, there's two main areas, and one is in humanitarian and disaster relief. These microreactors, being small and portable, could be taken and set up quickly in the event of a disaster to restore local power quickly and help the recovery efforts. And then ground operations, again, is on the defense and military side, which Troy will cover later. Moving on to the next slide. As NEI worked with our members, and there's over a dozen companies developing microreactors today, and we also worked with potential customers for microreactors. The questions we most frequently heard or were asked is, number one, when will they be ready? Number two, how much will they cost? And number three, how are we going to get over the challenges or barriers to their deployment? So the first thing we did, we went out and put together a study on the roadmap for deployment of microreactors. And we looked at a couple of things. One, we looked at the timeline, and that's the picture you're looking at here. And what we found is that microreactors can be deployed much more quickly than nuclear reactors have been in the past, or even their larger cousins. And the reason for that being is that they're so small, they're so simple with very few components in them, and so there's very little information that needs to be there's very little that needs to be designed, very little information that needs to be reviewed by the regulator, and then constructing and building them, manufacturing them can be done much quicker. So this was our nominal timeline, and I'd say it's about 7 years, and this is in comparison to maybe 8 or 10 years for a grid scale advanced reactor. And we think that there's a lot of opportunity to accelerate this schedule. So we were a little bit conservative in that, and had our NRC licensing at 3 years. We think it can be done faster than that for microreactors, and even the manufacturing and construction time we think can be done a lot faster. And so great things are happening in that area. Well, let's go to the next slide. We also looked, this is part of the timeline, but in addition to the timeline, we looked at what are the challenges that are facing the deployment of microreactors. And while the only one that was a very difficult barrier to get through is the fuel supply, most of the others really just impact the timeline for microreactor developer. They weren't showstoppers. The fuel issue is that most of these microreactors rely on high assay, low enriched uranium. That's uranium enriched up to 20%. It's low enriched uranium, so it's not a proliferation concern. But there is no commercial supply for that fuel. And so the chicken and egg question is, how do you get the fuel if there's no reactors to use it? How do you build reactors that need the fuel if there's no supply for it? And so the answer is that we need the Department of Energy to provide an interim supply and help a commercial supply become available. And DOE does have access to fuel that could be used for those purposes. But nonetheless, this shows up in the timeline, and it does represent one of the longer lead time items for the deployment of microreactors. The other challenges were in that the speed in which industry can develop designs, the speed in which customers are able to move and make decisions, and then also the ability to leverage the technology of microreactors to get some streamlining benefits in the regulation of them. Going to next slide. So the next question we went to answer is the cost of microreactors. And we started out knowing that the local price for electricity in remote markets are much higher than the grid. And so we looked at what is the actual generating cost, and we based this on the fuel cost that also includes the transportation of the fuel. This does not, these colored bars that go across with each of the different submarkets only represent those costs. They don't represent the sunk capital costs. They don't represent the O&M costs. So it's just the diesel fuel cost. And then we estimated the cost of microreactors. This data was obtained from the developers, and there's a range in cost depending on the type of design and the location where it's deployed. So that shows up in a range, this red, purple, and blue bars. And what it shows is obviously the first of a kind is always more expensive, but as you continue to manufacture and build these, the prices come down as you incorporate these lessons learned. And so two main conclusions from this. One is that even at the highest expected cost for microreactors, they are competitive in some markets. And they're competitive without government support. And there is government support out there. There's production tax credits, loan guarantees that could be used to reduce the first of a kind cost. And the second key conclusion from this is that if we can achieve the lowest expected cost for microreactors, they can be competitive in all markets, and they even get pretty close to being competitive in the U.S. grid market. And so that's particularly important as we look longer term into microgrids within the continental United States. Next slide, please. And then the third study we looked at and put together was how to streamline the regulation of microreactors, because we recognize that the regulatory process that's in place today, while it is capable of licensing microreactors, that's not a concern. It was designed for large light water reactors, a very different technology, and so it's not the best suited for regulating microreactors. And we evaluated all of the particular areas in which microreactors would be regulated and put together our priority list of topics. And these were a priority because they're the ones that we felt were most needed to be addressed before applications started going into the NRC. And just generally, it's the review scope and duration and level of effort. The NRC standard schedule is around 36 months, depending on the particular process you use, and we felt that microreactors could achieve something less than that. Operator licensing, microreactors are planning on using automatic features such that the reactor can essentially adjust power and control and shut down itself without any operator. And so the ability to take advantage of that was really important. The resident inspector, emergency preparedness, physical security, aircraft impact are also included in those areas. There were a couple of issues that were already being addressed or had started to become addressed in a broader context of advanced reactors. And so that citing and environmental reviews where we thought microreactors could just fit within those existing issues already. And then there were issues that would need to be addressed sometime in the future. They just weren't urgent, and that's the transportation, specifically if you're going to transport a microreactor with fuel loaded in it. Some companies are planning that, other companies are not. Annual licensing fees, the fuel qualification, because this gets to the fuel timeline that I mentioned earlier, and a couple of others. And so we've shared that report with the NRC, and you know, we're hopeful that we can make some progress on that. The other thing I'll mention within the regulatory space is that there is a microreactor company that has submitted an application to the NRC. That company is Oklo. They submitted a combined operating license last week to the NRC. And so that's very encouraging, and we look forward to watching that application go through the process. And next slide.
That was the last slide that I had for you.
Okay, back to you, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mark. So next we'll have Troy Warshall. Troy is a Director of Operational Energy Resilience in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Sustainment at the U.S. Department of Defense. After retiring from the United States Marine Corps in 2011, Mr. Warshall managed a $1.8 billion budget for the Army's Counter-IED Division until 2013. From 2013 until the present, he has led the Operational Energy Resilience Division. Since coming into the Energy Office, he has led reform in energy use for deployed forces, drove change in the military planning process to realistically consider energy implications, and championed training and education, and now leads the DoD effort for shore-based nuclear power. Thank you, Troy.
Well, thanks everybody, and I appreciate you having me on the call. Really excited to see the number of participants continuing to climb as we're hitting 1,050 as I speak. So you may ask yourself, why DoD and nuclear power? Just to give you a little bit of a background, obviously we're very sensitive in the Department of Defense to what the administration feels are its priorities. And this administration has placed specific emphasis on the fact that they want to revitalize the nuclear power industry. Now, that being said, if you have not had the opportunity to read the unclassified version of the National Defense Strategy, I would highly recommend that you do that. But what that does is characterize how the department sees the current status of the world and how do we need to posture ourselves in order to be able to meet the threats that we're facing. Now, some of the other folks that you'll hear on this call are very deep in nuclear power, understand all the nuances of it. Like Tim said, I'm a knuckle dragon Marine, so I've got one thought in mind, and it's the thought of the department, and that mission is to kill bad guys and break their toys. So as I'm looking at nuclear power, the thought is, how does that help my mission? And quite frankly, we're agnostic to power source. The Department of Defense consumes a massive amount of liquid fuel, mostly in the form of jet fuel, about $18 billion a year. 75% of that is fuel that's used to move, train, and fight the forces. And if there are options that we can use to look to reduce that liquid fuel consumption, and with that, the associated convoys, risk to life and limb, risk to mission, all those sort of things, we're very interested in doing that. Combine that with the fact that as we are as we're looking to our future, we're anticipating our energy demands are going to continue to climb. One can imagine if you're looking at directed energy weapons, laser, anything like that, the power requirement for that is going to be substantially higher than what we currently use. And nuclear power seems to be one of those opportunities. And you'll notice I keep tying this back to the threats we face. Obviously we've been in combat for the last decade plus. We've got very smart adversaries, and they've been watching how we fight and learning lessons from that. From that, they've adapted their doctrine. They understand that they don't want to take U.S. fighting forces head on. It's much better to look at the logistics side, and if they can stop our ability to move energy, that then stops our ability to project power. So, and we also operate in an all hazards environment. So whether it's climate change, whether it's, pick your natural disaster, we still have to continue to operate. And there's the potential for microreactors to help reduce that risk that we're facing. And we understand as we try and project power that we're very reliant on a potentially fragile civilian electric grid. When we get called to do our job, we have to do it no matter what. Doesn't matter climate, condition, attack, we have to be able to project power and get our forces moving. So, as we look at the ability to enhance our resilience, microreactors are, again, another very attractive opportunity, should all the technology bear out, to be able to enhance that resilience. And then, as Mark mentioned, it's one of those things that's very well suited towards operation in remote locations. We talked about two different efforts that are ongoing in the Department of Defense right now. One is led by the Strategic Capabilities Office, which is looking to develop that first mobile microreactor. There's a lot of question, as we're doing this, how do we use it? How do we deploy it? How do we man, train, and equip for it? And all those things are questions that we are answering while the Strategic Capabilities Office is looking to develop this first of a kind. They recently awarded a contract to 3 vendors, Westinghouse, X Energy, and BWXT, for design, advanced design and drawings, so they can do the engineering evaluation and then determine what happens in the next phase to build the first reactor. The other effort that's ongoing in the department, and Mark mentioned it, was the fixed base reactors. Typically on military bases, we have critical loads that need to be powered. And if we can take those off the grid, put those on nuclear power, and then use the commercial electric grid as our backup, we've enhanced our resilience capability significantly. We understand that most of the important load, probably between 10 and 15 megawatts, and after talking with reactor companies, we believe we'll be able to daisy chain multiples of these together to be able to meet the requirements that we have for power and stuff on our bases. And obviously we're looking at load shedding and things like that, because the bowling alley necessarily isn't something that needs to be powered in time of crisis, but the operations center might be. So how do we make smart energy decisions and then ensure that we can power those things to be able to project power and meet the mission that we require? And then finally, we're working closely with Department of Energy, keeping an eye on industry. You may have heard of Section 327 of the FY19 National Defense Authorization Act that looks to do a demonstration project between DOE and DOD to enhance energy resilience on a domestic military base. And we're on track to meet the 2027 goal. We think, in fact, that we're going to be able to beat that. So very exciting time in the department, and I really look forward to more discussion with this group and everybody online. And with that, I'll stop here and turn it back to you, Tim.
Thank you, Troy. Our next panelist will be Kees Niemer. Kees is the project manager for SMR deployment, and in Canada that includes microreactors and classification at the Canadian National Laboratories. Kees brings over 30 years of experience in leadership, project management, engineering, R&D, operations, construction, and business management in the nuclear industry, including several mega EPC projects, equipment design and fabrication, and the first of a kind engineering and construction. Prior to his current position at CNL, Dr. Niemer was the Senior Vice President at SNC Lavalin/Adkins, where he was responsible for U.S. commercial and Asia Pacific business. Before joining Adkins, he was Vice President of Operations and Project Management for the BWXT Nuclear Energy and Technology Services Business Unit. Dr. Niemer has also worked at CB&I Module Program and at Duke Energy. Kees?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I really appreciate the opportunity. If we can get the next slide. Oh, yeah, there we go. So just to give everyone a little bit of information about CNL, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. I'm sure everyone knows who all the DOE sites are in the U.S., but just to give you a quick information about CNL, we're made up of several different facilities and locations in Canada. Our largest is Chalk River Laboratory. It's the single largest science and technology laboratory in Canada. We have over 9,100 acres of land with 200 acres of lab complex. We have 17 different nuclear facilities. We have 2,800 employees with over 500 PhDs and masters and 1,600 engineering and scientific staff. Similar to DOE facilities, we are looking at advanced nuclear fuels and materials research, radiobiology, radioecology, hydrogen and hydrogen isotope management, nuclear safety risks and security risk management, nuclear and systems engineering, and nuclear chemistry applications. And we've had numerous nuclear reactors on our site over our years since the 40s. Next slide, please. So in Canada, when we talk about SMRs, that includes the microreactors. We basically, in Canada, we look at SMRs as in 3 streams. So we look at the larger on-grid applications to take place by the 2020s. We're looking at advanced technology streams of advanced, which would include advanced fuel utilization in the 2030s. And then stream 3, which is what this call and webinar is about today, is the microreactors. And these are really the off-grid reactors, as Alice mentioned earlier, the less than 40 megawatt type reactors. As we look at the Canadian market, we have quite a need for all the different streams, but in particular these microreactors. As we look at northern Canada, there are over 200 communities that are largely indigenous, and they're reliant on diesel generation, where they can only get diesel fuel into these remote communities 2 or 3 months a year. We also have a very large resource extraction needs in Canada for hydrogen production, as well as power for surface extraction and mining. And then, of course, we have Canada, we're committed to addressing climate change and action against climate change. And these microreactors in both the northern communities and the resource extraction needs, as well as the on-grid SMRs, will help us meet those needs. Also, as part of Canada, to looking at this, we have Canada put together a SMR roadmap for deploying SMRs in Canada, and that was a joint combination from the government of Canada as well as industry, and that was released in 2018. Next slide, please. So at CNL, we recognized back in 2016 that there was quite a bit of interest both in Canada and internationally in SMRs. So we put together a vision. Well, first we performed a market survey in 2017, and we wanted to understand what the needs and opportunities for SMRs in Canada were. And coming out of that market survey, we put together a vision for CNL, where we wanted to demonstrate a commercial viability of an SMR by 2026. We wanted to be recognized as a global leader in SMR prototype and testing. We also wanted to be recognized as a hub where multiple SMR and microreactor vendors could come build and test and demonstrate their reactors. And last but not least, we wanted to host a demonstration project by 2026. So in 2018, we initiated a 4-stage process to host a demonstration reactor at our CNL facilities, either Chalk River, which, as I mentioned, is in Ontario, or our White Shell facility, which is in Manitoba, which is in the middle of Canada, center province in Canada, above North Dakota. So we put together a 4-stage process, which the first stage is really a pre-qualification stage, and then a due diligence stage, then stage 3 would be a negotiation of land use, and stage 4 would be the actual project execution. Now at CNL, we want to host the site and provide the land available, as well as help with the R&D to support the different technologies. We believe that, particularly for the microreactors, it's extremely important for, at least for in Canada, for a microreactor to be able to build and demonstrate a reactor, because many of the remote communities, as well as your resource and extraction and mining companies, would also want to see a microreactor built and demonstrated before they would want to see it deployed at a remote community or a mining or resource extraction location. So to date, we've had To date, we've had 3 technologies who have passed our stage 1, which is U-battery, terrestrial energy, and star core, and we have 1 proponent which has passed both stage 1 and stage 2, and they're currently in stage 3 of our process, and that's Global First Power. And Global First Power is really, there have been numerous vendors that have submitted to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission as part of the VDR, vendor design review process, but only 1 has actually submitted a license application. And Global First submitted their license application to prepare site back in March of 2019. So they're the furthest along in the licensing application in Canada. Next slide, please. In addition to our deployment work, we're also at CNL, we're also have several research initiatives. One is the Canadian Nuclear Research Initiative, and that is a program to support collaborative research of SMRs and microreactors with CNL. And the goal of the program is to accelerate the deployment of the safe, clean, and secure technologies in Canada. We have numerous technology themes of this scenery initiative, which include feasibility studies, licensing and safety analysis, reactor physics, economics, SMR component degradation, thermohydraulics. We had our first intake back in late 2019, and we have chosen 4 of those projects that we're currently proceeding with and looking to kick off in this calendar year in 2020. Next slide, please. The other activity that we have going on at CNL is related to advanced reactors and microreactors, is our Clean Energy Development and Innovation Research Park. It's a clean energy park where we're trying to couple microreactors in coordination with renewables, a smart grid, energy storage, and multiple energy applications such as hydrogen reduction, transportation, desalinization, resource extraction, district heating, greenhouse growing, etc. And we want to provide both a demonstration platform as well as enable low carbon systems to be coupled with microreactors and provide the prototype for these diverse applications. So that's it for my slides. I appreciate it. Turn it back over to you, Tim.
Thank you so much, Keith. Our last panelist will be Nick Smith. Nick is the Deputy Director of the National Reactor Innovation Center at the Idaho National Laboratory. In this role, he's responsible for supporting initiatives to provide resources to reactor innovators to test, demonstrate, and conduct performance assessment to accelerate the deployment of advanced nuclear technology concepts. Nick was most recently with the Generation 4 Nuclear Reactor R&D Program Manager at Southern Company Services. In this role, he is responsible for highly leveraged collaboration with other reactor designers, national labs, influencing policymakers, and early engagement with regulators. He's worked on various aspects of microreactor R&D, demonstration, and deployment efforts. He's also played professional football for the New York Jets. Nick?
Thanks, Tim, and thanks for having me. We can go to the next slide here. So the National Reactor Innovation Center was launched in August of last year. And Ashley Finan is the director, and I am the deputy director. So we're still relatively new in the seat, but we've got a lot of exciting stuff coming down the pipe. Enriched was created with a very clear and focused objective, which is exciting because we get to enable the testing and demonstration of advanced reactor concepts. So the National Reactor Innovation Center is led by INL, but we are coordinating and working with other labs and DOE sites around the country. And the goal here is very specific to get these demonstration reactors online, and that can involve providing site access permits, fuel production support, support with regulatory, a number of different things that enable these demonstrations. Next slide. So there's really three key aspects to the Enriched mission, and that is to inspire the global community, to empower our stakeholders, and to deliver successful demonstration reactor projects. Next slide. So, that one, yeah. So the first few things that we have been working on here really revolve around kind of the staffing and strategic planning to get Enriched up and running. We are hiring right now. We've got a few job postings out, and we're looking for, technical project leads, program managers, communications folks. We need a wide range of different people to help us out right now. But we're also doing a lot of planning to enable these projects that are going to be designed with teams that are in separate geographic locations in some cases. You've got to be able to collaborate and get people on site with ease. We need, alignment and optimized efforts so that we can get, very specific missions accomplished there. We're working with a lot of different industry partners right now, and they're all pursuing different types of reactors. They're looking at different licensing pathways. They're different size machines, different fuel forms. And we're trying to find out what the best ways are to enable as many of those as possible so that we can do these reactors routinely. And part of that is addressing fuel transportation. How are we going to dispose of the spent fuel at the end of a demonstration? And how do you decommission these reactors once they've run their course? Next slide. So one of the really exciting things that I wanted to bring up here is this idea we have for a demonstration reactor test bed. So you can think about this as a facility that has some permanent test bed systems like the containment for a reactor and doors to get equipment in and out, and cranes, life safety systems like fire protection, radiation monitoring, a control room that's some sort of standardized, all the utilities associated with it. And then the reactor developer would bring in their, small machine that was maybe built offsite somewhere. It's, has to have the appropriate QA paper trail, but you would bring that into the test bed, operate it for 3 to 6 months, get some data, basically look at some transients, maybe look at some design basis accidents, and then wrap it up and pull it out of the cell, and then bring in another reactor and do that again. And so this is a really exciting way that we could get to a routine cadence of doing demonstration reactors at INL or other sites. Next slide. The EBR-2 dome at INL is one of the leading contenders as a demonstration reactor testbed site. So you can think about this one as the dome is a foot-thick concrete rebar reinforced with steel plating on the outside. So it would act as a safety significant containment structure. We can do safeguards category 2 fuels there. So basically HALEU or LEU, less than 20% enriched fuels here. There's a breakpoint in the DOE authorization space at 20 megawatts. So this facility would be good for machines that were less than 20 megawatts. Right now we're leaning towards a 10 megawatt heat rejection system for the dome because it seems like it would capture most of the microreactor concepts that we're seeing. We're designing it so that it would be able to accept a Connex box, a standard Connex box, so 8 feet by 8.5 feet. There's some repairs that need to take place. The crane that's inside the cell right now, or the dome right now, has to be repaired. There's new penetrations that are going to be needed for stuff like communications and utilities. And then we also are going to have to add some security systems and things like fire protection and radiation monitoring. Next slide. So the other location that we're looking at is the former Zero Power Physics Reactor cell, zipper cell, that's at the Materials and Fuels Complex at INL. So we actually have started a pre-conceptual design effort to look at how this facility would be used as a test bed, and we're working with industry to define the requirements for this facility. So it is a safeguards category 1 facility. It would be able to accept reactors that have highly enriched uranium fuel forms or plutonium fuel forms. We're thinking that this would be for very small systems, like 500 kilowatts or less thermal. It could be uprated, but there's some improvements needed to like the roof. It also would need fire protection, radiation monitoring. But the interesting thing about this is that you can go to a very small scale and verify physics, conduct critical experiments before scaling a reactor concept up for commercialization with a lower enriched form of fuel. And so it could be potential to save a lot of money and increase the speed to demonstration for a lot of concepts. Next slide. And then there's some other activities that we have going on around risk reduction of using the DOE authorization pathway for these demonstration reactors. So we're thinking about it in terms of if you have a TRL2 concept and you want to bring it up to TRL6 before you go to NRC to try and commercialize it, these test beds and running them at a DOE site could be a great way to do that. And there's a DOE pathway to authorize these machines that could potentially be faster and simpler for more experimental technologies. We're also looking at how we can go ahead and start the NEPA process and shorten the time scale for getting the NEPA records of decision to operate these reactors by using enveloped generic reactor characteristics and then being able to do a modification to that NEPA based on the specific reactor as long as it fits inside that envelope. We are preparing fuel production infrastructure. So if you have a reactor concept that's not a commercially available fuel form, or it's something unique that you only need a few kgs of it to do some experiments, or 100 kgs for your first reactor, well, we want to be able to do that and then work through the kinks on how you produce the fuel and allow it to go to maybe an engineering or a commercial scale up from there. And then another interesting thing that we're trying to provide is satellite office space for collaboration on site. There's something about being on the site out in the desert and being close to where the actual construction is happening, that it makes a big difference. And if we're going to have efficient collaborations with industry, we need to be able to set them up so they can work alongside us. So it's really exciting stuff going on there. Next slide. So just to wrap up on this, we've done this before. We built 52 reactors out in the desert in Idaho, and it's not something that's impossible. We're going to do it again. The momentum is here, the resources, the interest, all the focus is there, and it's exciting times to be in nuclear. This is the most exciting thing I've ever been a part of. So I appreciate y'all giving me the opportunity to present. I'll hand it back over to Tim.
Thank you, Nick. Cool stuff. So we're going to do a question and answer session. I've got questions that have been sent in. Thank you all for sending all these questions in. There were, I think, 120 questions that our team has processed. They've ranked them based on kind of the number of times people asked them. So the first question I have is for all panelists. What I'm going to go ahead and do is unmute all of y'all. So just unmute all the panelists unless your phone is muted. But the first question is, what are the pros and cons of microreactors versus SMRs?
Well, this is Mark
Troy,
Nichol
let me jump in on that one, at least
NEI.
from,
So SMR. Go ahead, Troy.
Well, Mark, I appreciate it from our point of view.
Keep in mind that
we're in size.
SMRs are both in the category.
Troy, just a second. Let's have Marcus go first.
Are all advanced reactors. So they all share similar advantages in terms of improved performance, simplicity, which translates into better economics and those sorts of things. So the key difference between microreactor and SMR is in the intended market. Microreactors are most suited for remote markets because of their size and simplicity. SMRs would not be a good fit just because they're too large. On the other hand, SMRs we expect to be lower cost just because of the cost advantages of that size reactor, and so they're a better fit in the continental grid market where cost competitiveness is much more critical. Next to Troy.
Thanks, Mark. I think for us, the DoD is not in the business of necessarily producing power. Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay, so what I'll say is, DoD is not.
Hey, Troy, it seems a little laggy.
Producing power. So what we're trying to do. Okay. DoD is not in the business of producing power, so what we're trying to do is size the reactor requirement to our need, and then use much of that power as we can on base. So I think reactors make a lot more sense versus SMR, at least from a military perspective. Over.
And I would just add to what Mark and Troy said, this is keys, is that the microreactors should be able to build more of the microreactors in a factory, and they should be more transportable than the larger on-grid SMRs.
Thanks for those responses, y'all. So our next question. Given this new interest in feasibility and new nuclear, what is the NRC doing to accelerate the review of microreactors and non-LWR design? And I think maybe.
Yeah, this is Mark Nichol. I'll start with that. So the NRC has been very proactive in looking at their regulations in preparing for applications of advanced reactors. The first thing they did is to assess their readiness and capability of reviewing an advanced reactor application. And this began several years earlier. And they concluded that, yes, the current regulations were adequate. They can review advanced reactor and microreactor applications. But they also identified that there are opportunities to improve on their regulations to better match with these technologies. And since then have been working toward addressing specific topics. So emergency preparedness is one of the first ones that they've looked at, and they have rulemaking ongoing for that. They've looked at physical security. More recently, they're looking at issues like environmental reviews to make those more streamlined. There's a long list of issues that they've been looking at, and they're all on the website. They have a very good website to find this information.
Do you want to add anything, Nick?
Yeah, I would just say that, Enriched is right now in an early engagement discussion with NRC on how we best transfer lessons learned and knowledge that's gained from these demonstration reactor projects. And we have some ideas, and some of it involves, getting NRC engaged even in a deeper level with these demonstrations that are running through the DOE authorization process, and allowing them to participate actively rather than just watch in the process. So I don't have anything I can pin down today, but we are definitely engaged with them, and it's an important topic because there should be a reasonably obvious path from total conceptual design that's never been built before in the world through this early demonstration, through the DOE authorization, and into a commercial licensing paradigm that's based on the data that you would have assumed that you would collect along the way.
Thanks.
And if I could just add
yeah.
If I could just add to that, in addition to what's already been said, the NRC and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission last year signed an MOU and they haven't quite worked out exactly how it's going to work yet, but the premise is that a lot of these microreactors would be licensed in both the U.S. and Canada and elsewhere in the world. And the goal is ultimately to be able to not duplicate efforts as far as reviewing the technologies in both Canada and the U.S. And once again, that has to be worked out to the details, but ultimately the goal is to be able to not necessarily share, but take advantage of work that's already been performed in one country by one regulatory agency and not repeating that same analysis in the other country.
Thanks for that perspective on the Canadian regulatory as well. For our next question, could the panel talk a bit about potential types of fuel and coolant forms that are being looked at for microreactors? So leaning in a little bit more of a technical direction. Maybe Nick, you'd like to start with this one?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, could you repeat that? It broke up a little bit on my end.
What are the potential fuel and coolant forms that are being looked at for microreactors and how they differ from traditional reactors?
The majority concepts that we're seeing right now are TRISO-fueled. There's a big chunk that are kind of metallic fuel, uranium, sodium fast reactor designs. There's a lot of molten salt reactors. The vast majority of those will be fluoride salts with graphite moderator, and then there's a handful of chloride salt, fast spectrum molten salt reactors. So it's really in those buckets for the most part. TRISO-fueled, there's molten salt cooled, TRISO-fueled HTGRs, and then the sodium fast reactors, and then the liquid fueled MSRs. And I saw a question, I'll just add one more thing. I saw a question about thorium and whether or not that was being evaluated. So you can't use thorium to run a reactor directly, right? Thorium breeds into uranium-233. And so whatever pathway you use, you got to start with, you're going to burn a uranium isotope to create the fission. The testbed concept that we're looking at for the zipper cell would be capable of operating U-233 or thorium originating reactors.
Yeah, I think that really covers it, shows the diversity of application. Mark, here's a question maybe for you, and also maybe Keys for the Canadian approach. How can microreactors provide flexibility in electricity demand? Can microreactors also help with microgrids?
Yes, absolutely. So first, microreactors can produce usable heat in addition to electricity, and so this is part of their flexibility. As demand increases or falls, or if you are integrated with renewables or storage technologies, you can continue to operate at 100% power, and you can shift your energy product from electricity to heat. That heat could be used for district heating of homes, businesses. It could be used for directly in storage itself, or it could be used to generate hydrogen or industrial processes. And so it gives you that flexibility to alter your energy product based on momentary demands, but also be able to continue operating at 100% power.
No, I think Mark pretty much covered it.
Okay, well, sort of building on that, and this might be an opportunity for Alice to jump in, but let's start with Keys. For communities, particularly indigenous or Aboriginal communities, but obviously not limited to them, they could benefit greatly from microreactors, but has there already been outreach that has happened with these communities to find out their interest levels? This is both a Canadian and US community outreach question, and we'd like to see the differences in your approach.
So in Canada, I can't speak to the US, but for Canada, we are going through quite a significant outreach in certain areas. In fact, one of the communities outside of our White Shell facility, which is in Manitoba, that community, Pinawa, has basically asked, and they would like to see a microreactor built at our White Shell site. And they are offering their community, because they're kind of the end of the line as far as electricity lines go. So they're trying to demonstrate to the other communities in Canada and the remote communities in particular the value, and so they could come and put their hands on it and see how it will work in a small environment. And then we do have through different vendors, they've already started going out and speaking in different venues to try to have that outreach and have the opportunity to answer questions, as well as to describe the benefits of their technologies.
Alice, would you like to chime in on some of the US approach?
Sure. Part of what we've done in our funded microreactor program is support some of these studies, looking at techno-economic analyses for microreactors to meet market needs in various areas. So we've supported some studies regionally. We've got one underway looking at the Northwest United States. We supported a study looking at microreactor applications in Puerto Rico, looking at the potential for small reactors to support microgrids there. So that study is going to be available soon. And we have a competitive cost shared opportunity where people can apply to have studies funded through those vehicles as well. And some of our funding opportunities can be found at the GAIN website at www.gain.inl.gov under the Funding Opportunities tab. We provide opportunities to fund studies of these sorts.
Thank you, Alice. For our next question, we'll start with, this could be to Mark probably first. How does the provided development timeline change between first of a kind and nth of a kind? And also you might want to explain that difference in concept. Also, how many successful builds are needed to go from first of a kind to nth of a kind costs?
Yeah, so first of a kind is as it sounds, it's the very first unit that you produce. Nth of a kind is a concept that as you build, as you continue to build the same design over and over and over again, you learn lessons that you translate from one build to the next build. And as you learn those lessons and translate them, you help to reduce the cost and schedule. And so eventually you get to an nth of a kind, which is sort of a steady state where you're not seeing a lot of reductions in cost and schedule anymore. Typically what you see is some percentage of reduction in cost and schedule every doubling of units that are produced. And so we didn't look specifically at the nth of a kind schedule and what it would be, but based on that roughly 7-year schedule that I laid out in the presentation, I would imagine we could easily shave off 3 years or so in getting to that nth of a kind. Some of that is going to depend on not just these lessons learned in manufacturing and getting these in factories. It's going to depend on the fuel supply and getting this commercial supply of HALEU fuel. And it's also going to depend on getting some streamlining efficiencies in the regulatory processes as well.
Did anybody want to add anything to that? Okay, the next question, and we'll start maybe with Alice on this one. Is there a reason, well, so Mark listed spent fuel as, or did not list spent fuel as one of the issues. Would this issue not need to be addressed before someone could purchase a reactor? So how does spent fuel play into all of this?
Certainly the fuel cycle is going to be an important part of a reactor economic case for NRC licensed reactors. And this is where I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that for NRC licensed reactors, we do have a standard spent fuel contract where spent fuel from commercially licensed reactors would be part of that overall spent fuel pathway. That being said, we're constantly doing research and development on the entire fuel cycle technology portfolio for these new fuels being looked at. So that is part of the research and development we're doing to support development of innovative technologies.
Mark, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so I didn't list it as an issue because as Alice said, there are pathways for the disposal that are safe and technically sound. We do get questions about what will happen with the used fuel for microreactors, and microreactors have some options available to them that the larger ones don't. The first thing to point out is that the fuel is going to, the reactor will operate with the same fuel for 10 years or longer in many cases. And so it's a very, very long period of time before you have to take that fuel out. Many of the developers are conceiving that these would essentially be like batteries, where after the period of 10 to 20 years of operations, you would take that reactor and fuel away. You'd in its place, you'd put a new reactor and fuel. And so with the used fuel, one of the options is you could take it to a central facility, remove the fuel there, store it safely, and then you could refurbish the other reactor parts and then reuse them for another location.
Great, thanks. Question for Troy. Does the DoD envision following a path of development similar to that performed for naval reactors? And will the DoD require microreactors to be licensed by the NRC, DOE, and/or DoD? So how does licensing play into that? And last, are you on your schedule for 2027 or sooner?
No, great question. So to answer the last part first, yes, we are on schedule. It looks like we're going to be able to easily meet and potentially exceed the 2027 timeline. Going back to your first questions, for the stationary reactor, we're looking for an NRC licensed unit. Like I said, I don't necessarily want to own and operate for a fixed base. I'm more interested in doing a power purchase agreement. Again, that's because I'm not really in the business of generating power. That's not my core mission. So let the smart folks that really know how to do that, and we'll just buy the power. For the mobile reactor, currently they're looking at DOE license. However, everybody's working closely with the NRC so that the mobile reactor could be NRC licensable. That that'll be up to the company whoever wins the award and develops that reactor to go down that path. But that was one of the things that we stressed, was we wanted it to be licensable for an NRC product. Over.
Thanks, Troy. Another question from a professor. How can universities in the US and Canada support microreactor development? Maybe let's start with Alice for this one.
Yeah, with the Department of Energy, for our research and development lines, we set aside up to 20% of our R&D budget to support research at universities, and we have some other funding areas where universities compete. But specifically for microreactors, we established scopes of work for universities to apply to. That's an annual funding process, and information about that funding opportunity can also be found at the GAIN website under funding opportunities.
Keys, would you like to add anything from the Canadian perspective?
Sure, and similar to the US CNL, we have numerous collaborations with universities in Canada, and in particular, the New Brunswick initiative, where there has formed a consortium between, maybe that consortium is not the right word, but they formed an alliance between New Brunswick Power, some local universities, and also two SMR developers in the New Brunswick area of Canada, and CNL is also involved in part of that. So there's a lot of research that will be going through that research initiative at New Brunswick University, and so that's one example, as well as I said, other collaborations that CNL has with universities throughout Canada.
Thanks. Nick, question for you. What are the criteria that you plan to use to select which specific reactor designs will be selected to demonstrate at Enriched? Also, can you explain a little bit more about the DOE authorization, how the DOE authorization pathway will be shorter than NRC?
Sure. So the Enriched facilities, the testbed facilities that we're talking about, are going to be available to anyone who wants to use them. We aren't going to be paying to build people's reactors, though. So if a company is able to develop a reactor, you know, whether it's through some other DOE award or through some private funding, then they would be able to bring that machine and test it at the test bed. There will be requirements on the types of machines that are capable to be demonstrated. So like thermal power requirements is a big one. I mean, we can't put a 300 megawatt machine in a containment that's only got 10 megawatts of heat rejection. So that's going to be one thing. The source term of the machine is going to be another one. If the reactor has, you know, some huge source term that's volatile, and it doesn't fit within the envelope that the facility was licensed for, then, or authorized for, then it won't be able to work there. But for the most part, I think anything under 20 megawatts with a reasonable safety basis would be able to fit either in the EBR2 dome or in the zipper cell. What was the second part of the question there?
How the DOE process, like the authorization process, would be shorter than the full NRC licensing.
The DOE process it's more similar to kind of the licensing modernization risk-informed performance-based process, and it's got several different steps in it that basically increment you into an understanding of what the safety design strategy is. And it was designed around the idea that you were going to be pushing forward the technology curve and looking at machines with less information, you know, data and science to back up the safety basis case. So we think we can utilize that to guarantee the safety of the operation, maybe not guarantee the success of the experiment, if that makes sense.
Okay, and next for Mark, Oklo recently submitted their license application to the NRC. how did they overcome the regulatory issues identified in your slide? Do you see more opportunities for streamlining the regulatory process?
Yeah, well, I can't comment too specifically on the Oklo application. Because I don't know all the details, but I do know that we've worked with them and the other microreactor companies in developing the industry perspectives on those regulatory issues in the NEI report. So I would just assume that their application is consistent with those.
Sorry, I missed my mute button that time. The next question, and let's maybe start with Alice again for this one. What kind of stories are we telling about this technology? What would it mean for people to have a microreactor in their community?
Well, as I mentioned in some of the use cases, this technology has the potential to really bring benefits to remote communities where electricity is very expensive. It can be transformative in that way. We're also seeing cases where large grid disruptions from natural disasters could be largely aided with the ability to bring in power on an emergency basis. We've heard from the Department of Defense applications where this kind of power can literally save lives in a very meaningful way. So I just think the stories here are so compelling. I showed a couple of them in my opening remarks, and I'm sure that as we bring these technologies forward, we're going to have more and more opportunities to tell these stories, especially as people come forward to develop and deploy them.
Thanks, Alice. I think that's a great place to close with that positive outlook on the future. I want to thank everybody who attended. I especially want to thank our panelists, each and every one of you. I thank you for your time. Thanks to the co-sponsoring organizations, the American Nuclear Society Young Members Group, the Nice Future Initiative, and the IYNC, as well as the DOE NE for their help in organizing this. And a quick plug for my friend Susie Baker and Third Way for their Nuclear Reimagined art, which we used and Alice used. And we just want to remind everybody to come attend our next webinar. There will be an announcement on that going out by email, and there will be a link to register that goes out with a follow-up to this webinar. That'll be on April 15th. And if you need to contact us, you have our email address and our Twitter handle there. Thank you all so much.